this is good. Your wheat field is good. Hello, everybody. I'm glad you could come. I'm Todd Mandel. For those of you who were here last week, I'm back. I'm here to talk about Judaism and the chosen persons in Judaism. The assignment here was, just 1 minute on my background. For those of you, it'll be a repeat. I'm from Cleveland originally. I went to Orthodox Jewish day school till I went to college, well-versed in the religious aspects of Judaism. And then probably in the last 20 years or so that I've lived here, approximately, I've been involved in the secular Jewish community and the religious community, Jewish community. And the secular stuff is, advocating for Jewish causes in a variety of forums and with a variety of politicians and diplomats and wherever possible. So the assignment for tonight was to talk about the primary human agent, a founder, a messenger, a teacher of Judaism, give some details of when and where that person lived, and talk about the partnership between the human and the divine in Judaism. So I set about doing this, and I thought, well, I could talk about Abraham or Moses or Jacob or etc. And I realized that there is a chain linking basically God to present day, to me standing here. Every part of it is critical in the link. So I decided I couldn't really pick one. It does start with God. We are a monotheistic religion. God appears to Abraham, tells him to leave his land, which is basically Iraq today, to go to what is essentially Israel today. Abraham picks up and leaves. He does it. God tests him. God has direct communications with Abraham about any number of things throughout his lifetime. Abraham gets married, has children. Isaac is one of the children. God is in touch with Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. God is in touch with Jacob. Jacob has 10 sons. One of them is Joseph. God is in touch with all these people. I'm whizzing through a lot of history, but essentially, once Abraham moved to what I'll just call Israel, the family lived there, which was then the land of Canaan. There was a drought and a famine. The family basically goes to Egypt. Joseph is already in Egypt because his brothers sold him into slavery. And there's a lot, by the way, in a lot of the stories, a lot of human dynamic troubles and issues between brothers, fathers and sons, etc. throughout all of this. They're not easy stories. But anyway, Joseph is down in Egypt. It becomes a pretty significant person there. Egypt has food. The brothers and their family come down to Egypt for that purpose. The brothers' families grow. The Pharaoh of the time dies out. All the brothers die. And the Jews, the family of Jacob at that point, the descendants, are becoming a little large in number for the Egyptians. They don't like it, so they enslave the Jews. The Jews are there for hundreds of years, enslavement. And then Moses comes along and takes them out. God is now in touch with Moses. So for many years, God is not in touch with anybody. But Moses comes along reluctantly. He is God's messenger. And God takes the Jews out of Egypt after the 10 plagues and basically wanders through the desert. It has this group wander through the desert for 40 years until they eventually get back to the land of Israel. So notwithstanding all the history, which covered, basically somewhere in the order of about 1,000 years right there, the last 40 years, about what I just spoke about, is key. So God is actually appearing to this group of people at Mount Sinai, and during this period, from the leaving of Egypt to the 40 years where the Jews get back into Israel, are all of the main Jewish holidays. The holiday of getting the Torah is called Shavuos. The holiday of leaving Egypt is called Passover. The holiday celebrating the huts that the Jews lived in while wandering is called Sukkot. We still celebrate them today. Passover's coming up in a couple of weeks. Sukkot is in the fall. I build a sukkah. We eat in there for about a week. And Shavuos is a 2-day holiday that's 7 weeks after Passover. Shavuos is where we got the Torah, which I talked about last week, which is the 5 books of Moses. In there are all of the commandments about keeping the Sabbath. Rosh Hashanah, once a year you sit down and you try to view how you were last year, how you can be better, try to atone for your sins, etc. So that 40-year period, there's a lot of contact between God and the people, God and Moses, miracles going on, etc. Now, without any of the prior links, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, other brothers, Moses, we wouldn't have gotten there. So every link was important, and it's hard to pick one. After Moses dies, Joshua leads the Jews into the land of Israel. There's a series of prophets. Eventually, and Moses was really the last person that God appeared to in a direct way. The prophets, he appears, but in less direct ways. And then ultimately, he stops appearing to people or stops communicating with people directly as he did. So the period of the prophets goes by, and there are a lot of prophets and a lot of books on it, which I talked about last week. Ultimately, the kingdom of Judah comes into, is in effect, there's kings, King Solomon, King David, etc. And the Jews are living in essentially Israel. They have built a temple to God, which there were all sorts of instructions in the Torah of how to build it and what to do in it. And so that period is pretty filled, right? But then something happens, and the Jews get kicked out of Israel. They had a temple for 500 years. They've been there for 1,500 years. And they get thrown out. And it's an exile. And they never quite make it back the way they had established themselves. So there's the Babylonians come and kick them out. The Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, Muslims come. Christians come. Every one of these was difficult. And the Jews they for a period, they come back and they build a second temple. And they're there again for a few hundred years. But by the end of the Roman period, that temple's gone again. And it has not been rebuilt. The spot where that temple was, both temples, is whenever you see a picture of Jerusalem, there's a gold mosque, Dome of the Rock on it. And it's a highly contested area. There's probably a lot of great, wonderful things buried under there, but nobody can dig. It's a very politically charged area. And the reason the Western Wall, which is outside of that area, is so sacred is that's where the spot where both temples were. So by all measures, the religion should have ended. It should have ended when the Jews were in Egypt. It should have ended when they lost the first temple. It should have ended when they lost the second temple. It should have ended when they were dispersed among all the nations. And the dispersion and was not easy. Even though the Jews have gone to all these different areas in different countries, it usually was combined with persecution, sometimes forced conversions. There was no land they could go back to that they controlled, no central authority, no common language, no way other than the Torah to really determine how to be Jewish. How do you live a Jewish life? You don't have the base anymore. And it's not just for a few years. It's hundreds and hundreds of years. And the period, so what happens? So rabbis come along, great rabbis. And so a lot of people tend to focus less on the rabbis. But for all practical purposes, for the last 2,000 years, It was the rabbi's interpretation of the Torah and these other events, and putting into a system in place that no matter where we were on the planet, we would be able to still be Jewish, find a way to be Jewish. So rabbis, back at the turn of where the BC CE was changing over, came up with a set of laws on how to live your daily life. They eventually wrote them down. They wrote how they argued about it and got to those laws. They did it in Hebrew, which kept the language alive. It's also the language in the Torah, but these were books that people were involved with on a daily basis. So even though you may have spoken Persian and Arabic and whatever language, Polish and German, you also had this second language with you even through today. I obviously speak English well, but I can manage in Hebrew. And so that's been true the whole way through, and it's because of a lot of the work that the rabbis did and thought that they put into this, because they knew there's not going to be a central location. There's no central address for who knows how many years. So the rabbis do that. They do that for a couple of hundred years, from 0 to 300. Hundreds of years go by. Commentators come up in the years 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, and they're speaking all different languages. There's they're Jewish, but there's Arabic commentators, Spanish, French, etc. But again, they're writing in Hebrew. Their commentary gets added into these books. So every book you buy today has it. And again, it's the study of this book, how to live a Jewish life, that has kept the people going. Many more hundreds of years go by, and people are following these rules, and they wind up in, a lot of times you'll see, Fiddler on the Roof, okay? It's a story about a little tiny Jewish, we call them shtetls, they're little villages, and they were scattered all over Poland and Russia and Germany, and little enclaves, and they were surrounded and usually near non-Jewish areas, but the Jews kept to themselves, lived their lives, followed these books, read these books, and they were all part of the chain. They're part of this link, and yes, they're studying about Abraham and Moses and all these other people, but now we're thousands of years into the period where the average person is carrying this along, average Jew. The Arab countries, notwithstanding what it looks like today, there were hundreds of thousands of Jews in Arab countries, huge populations in Cairo, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, etc., all over, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. And essentially the Jews went where they were welcomed. So, and the stay was never always all that long. So the reason there were a lot of people in Poland and Germany and Russia was they were invited in, and it was safe, and it was a good place to live, more or less. Depends how you define good, but a decent place to live. So Jewish populations emerged, same in the Arab countries. World War II comes along, the Holocaust occurs, total disaster for European Jewry, total disaster for mainly Jews living in most any country except the United States and some South American countries. But through this disaster that occurs, there's still people studying these books, concentration camps. There's still little things going on. There was a concentration camp survivor. There was an Israeli astronaut a few years back. It was in a space shuttle. It blew up, but he was being hosted on the American space shuttle, and he brought up with him into space this little tiny Torah that somebody had. It was like a kid's Torah that they had a bar mitzvah in a concentration camp, and he took it to space. And to think that this little thing could ever be in that spot, incredible. So it's just one little thing after another. Finally, the modern state of Israel appears in 1948, 2,000 years. So that's a pretty miraculous thing, to have no land, no space, persecution, all of the things that they endured. You know, a lot of people today, Jews and non-Jews, see that a lot of, and as truly a miraculous thing. Is God still working miracles? So we have that. You now have, you know, Jews in America, Jews in Canada, Jews in Israel, Jews pretty much all over, but the main concentration is now in America and Israel. I saw on your slide there are at least 800 million Hindus, right? Probably more. I think there's 1 billion just Catholics, 1 billion Muslims, probably these numbers are higher. Anybody venture a guess how many Jews you think there are today in the world? You'd think there was a lot. It's in the news. Yeah, you can't turn the newspaper, the TV on without Israel being a story every single day. There are less than 20 million Jews in the world. Okay, so we are like 0.0001%. All right, Catholics a fifth of the world, Hindus probably a fifth, Muslims probably a fifth, and so on. So it's been a long story. It's been a long link. But I would say to you that our existence, my being able here to talk to you today about this, I mean, it really is a direct link of these events against a lot of odds. You know, maybe we're proof there's something to it. I don't know. We've made it for one reason or another. And my personal view, and I've debated this with a few rabbis, is in many ways, I think today, this year, these days, notwithstanding the problems that Israel has, and there's still some anti-Semitism, plenty of it to go around, I think this is the golden age for Jews. We kind of feel like we've got a state in Israel. We feel very comfortable in this country, Canada, and other countries that we're in. And while peace in Israel is not imminent, and assimilation is a problem. I was talking to somebody about that. We are doing okay. And now, we've been okay before. Hopefully we're okay for a long time. But it's all part of the link. And today we're doing well, so and not everywhere, but in most places. The last thing I want to say, so I pick everything. That's my answer. The other thing is there's a tradition in part of Judaism has a mystical component. Some rabbis who developed a branch of it, and there's the story when Abraham is trying to convince God to not destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and God says, "Show me 10 people that's worth. If you can find me 10 people that are worth saving there, I'll save the city." It doesn't work out. God destroys them anyway. But so today, the mystics in Judaism believe that there's something called the Lamed Vavneks. So those are just 2 Hebrew letters, and they each have a numerical value. And Lamed is 30, and Vav is 6. So it's the 36 nicks. So what this is there has to be 36 people on the planet that are worth saving at all times. They don't know who they are, and everybody is supposed to live their life as if they're one of the 36 in a humble way, in a good way. Many of the things you just heard about on the Hinduism front, and that these people are there even though you don't know who they are and they don't know who they are. So those 2 are chosen people. And if you meet one, let me know. Okay. Thank you.